Hey, welcome to another Quick Tip Tuesday. Today we're going to talk very shortly and quickly about toxic clinic culture. Before we get started, if this is the first time that you've caught one of these Quick Tip Tuesdays, I'm Dr. Carrie Wise, founder, JoyfulDVM, veterinarian, certified life coach, and the instructor inside of the Vet Life Academy program. I want to talk a little bit about toxic veterinary work environments, because it's something that we talk about a lot, right? We reference our workplaces, our clinics, and other, like even sometimes our academic institutions, as toxic. We label people as toxic. And I wanted to just kind of point out exactly what's happening and show you how, as you start to hear yourself referencing your place of employment and even people that you work with as toxic, there's actually some opportunity there. So when it comes to the toxic work environment, the quality of a veterinary clinic, the environment of that clinic culture, the quality of it is directly related to the gap between expectations and reality. So whenever we start to see behaviors that are not ideal, so the behaviors that we're labeling as toxic, and then overall like the behaviors of groups of people and decisions and all of that we come back and we label as toxic, what I want us to recognize is that there's always a gap between expectation and reality that is creating that. The 5 components of culture in a veterinary organization boil down to these things, in my opinion. So the 5 components of a strong veterinary culture include leverage, schedule, pay, policies, and leadership. So leverage, meaning the way that you're staffed. I don't know if there's a cat standing right in front of me. The way that you're staffed, the support staff that you have, the doctors, the receptionist, all of that. So the way that your staffing works together, that's leverage. The schedule, so the hours that you work, the hours that you're open. The pay, so the money that you make, how your pay is determined, when you're evaluated, and when raises are available, if they're available. Policies, both internal and external policies. So how do you handle things within your hospital? How do you handle all of your client-facing situations? And then leadership. Who's in charge? Do we know who's in charge? And is the person in charge really the person who is making all the decisions, taking all the shots, all of that kind of stuff? So when we start to have a gap between expectation and reality in these 5 areas, leverage, schedule, pay, policies, and leadership, what happens is trust starts to erode. As trust starts to erode, then that is displayed in the behaviors of the people who work in those organizations. So when you start to label an organization as toxic, if you want to get away from a toxic environment, what I want you to consider is that there's probably just a gap there, which means there's also opportunity. The other thing that we definitely want to consider is that a toxic work environment only becomes problematic, and we only suffer through it and with it if we allow that for ourselves. Because any of that misery that we feel in these environments can only be created by our own thinking. That's simply neuroscience. Emotion is only created by our own thoughts. So it is not necessarily the existence of the gap between expectation and reality, but it's what we believe about the existence of that gap. I think the opportunity is to fix the gap 100% of the time, and that every single one of us inside of a veterinary organization has an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody to help promote change in these areas if it's needed. So even if you're not the decision maker, don't let yourself believe that you have no power here. If you identify an opportunity to improve something within your hospital when it comes to leverage, schedule, pay, policies, and leadership, then you certainly do have the total ability to have a conversation with somebody who can help make those changes come to reality. When you have those conversations, you also gain a lot more information. You definitely can find out, maybe it's just a no, it's a hard no and things are never going to change. That's good information for you to have too. But instead of being brave and having these conversations in the areas where we see opportunities to improve, many of us just settle into the misery and settle into the existence of things how they are. And in that misery, then we start the blaming and the commiserating and the complaining all the time about what's going on, and the labeling of people as toxic, and giving groups of people labels, and having all these assumptions about what's going on, but we've actually never had conversations with the people in the first place about those things. So we really start to stack on our own misery and create our own toxicity. And all of that is only created because we have let our minds go unchecked with the stories it's creating about the environment that we work in. Instead, like I said, the opportunity is just to identify the gap. Recognize that what you expected and what you're experiencing are different. There's probably an opportunity to have a conversation there. And if you have those conversations and the reality isn't going to adjust more into what you expected in the first place, then you still have your opportunity to choose if this is the place that you want to continue working. What you don't want to do is just to continue to stay there acting as if you have no choices, acting as if you are a victim of your environment, because I want to promise you that you are not. Every single one of us has a choice when it comes to the way that we feel day in and day out in our veterinary professions. So if you can take a moment and think about the things that really bother you the most where you work, the things that really are the components for you, what truly you believe are the worst things about the places that you work, I want you just to step back away from it, look at that list and say, can I think about this differently? Is there possibly another perspective about this that I just haven't considered? Give yourself the gift of an alternate story around those things. Because right now, what I can promise you, no matter what's true and not true within that actual facility where you work, what I can promise you 100% of the time is that all of the misery that you're feeling, any of the suffering that you're experiencing, is only being created by your own thinking. That doesn't mean that you don't have things that need to be changed. That doesn't mean that some of those feelings aren't justified, but just recognize that there's nothing ever outside of you that's creating the way that you feel, because neuroscientifically, emotions are only created by thoughts, and you are the only one who can think for you. All right, my friends, that's going to wrap up this Quick Tip Tuesday. If you want to know more about this idea of the clinic culture, the 5 components, and you want some examples of the way that people behave when there is a gap between the expectations and reality in the areas of leverage, schedule, pay policies, and leadership, I talk about this in depth in today's podcast episode. It's joyfuldvm.com/7. You can jump right to that podcast episode. You can learn more about this and more about the specific behaviors that pop up when we have gaps in those expectations and what you can do about it. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you next time.